Okay, so we are back with another video. Now, some time ago, I did a video on speaker management and speaker placement. And within that video, we went through quite a bit of information on there. But I promised a follow up video where I would illustrate using diagrams and pictures and sort of show you ideas of the best way to place your speakers in a particular room, how to place them, where to place them, high low, etc., for the best results coverage wise. Because as you know, as a sound man, you'll always get people within a particular building or your building come to you. Sorry, guys, I just had some coke and I'm burping uncontrollably. But you'll always have people that'll come to you during and after a show, and they'll say to you, I can't hear loudly enough. And they're not necessarily pointing out to a specific, some people might say, I can't hear the vocals, da da da. Sorry about that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking in particular, just in general. They're just talking about their ability to be able to hear. I think I know what's causing this issue. Just 1 second. Oh, I'm not connected. Okay, we're just going to have to work through with it. But they're just talking about their general ability to be able to hear what's going on, or what was going on during the show. And whilst it might sound a bit dumb, there are actually ways in which you must place and configure your speakers in order for you to get the best results, and to maximize on what we call coverage. And if you don't place them correctly, you have a situation where you don't have enough coverage in certain areas, whereas you have more than enough in other areas. So, the individuals where you don't have good coverage are telling you to turn it up, whereas the people who are in the areas that are over covered are saying, you know what, this is loud enough, any louder, and it's too loud. So please don't turn it up any further. And that's a really annoying show to have to mix for, where you're having sort of two groups of people who are giving you contradictory information, and there isn't anything you can do about it. So I'm going to talk about speaker placement because there's some things that people think are very obvious, and they're not. So, for example, the first image we're looking at here, let me just quickly make sure this is definitely recording what we're doing. Yes, it is. Okay. So, for example, this first image here, some people looked at it and thought, yeah, this is perfect. Yeah, this is perfect. Fine. There's no issues whatsoever. But for those that know, that have looked at it and gone, oh, wait, hang on a second. I'm going to have some issues with this. And if this was, let's just say for argument's sake, this was actually a concert setup. Okay. And this area here is the stage. However, you had individuals lined up all the way up until there. Now, for those of you who know, you'll know straight away that there's a dead pocket somewhere around there that may not be covered right at the very, very front. And that's where you're likely to have individuals who are saying, can't really hear as clear as I'd like to. And then obviously you have a situation where individuals that are in these back corners here aren't getting full coverage, in the sense that they might be able to hear certain things that are panned one way and can hardly hear certain things that are panned the other way, and vice versa. Or they can't hear at all because the volume is not loud enough. Whereas the people who are, say, here, in this central area here, are the ones who are saying, right, okay, any louder and it's too loud. It's too loud, because they're getting full coverage. Now, these speakers are actually angled quite nicely, in my opinion. Let's just say, for argument's sake, this was a stage. I know this is actually a picture of a living room, and this is meant to illustrate a sofa, and this is meant to illustrate a television, and these are speakers in a room. But we're gonna picture this as being a what you call it, a stage, yeah. And this is the sound booth. and these are the speakers, obviously, and there are people all in this actual room, whether they're sat down or they're stood up, which is another point that you need to take into consideration. Okay. Now, what most people will do is they'll put their speakers straight, not angled, but straight, going in that direction and straight facing that direction. So the front of the speaker is actually straight, and it's pointing directly at the back. Okay, that would be problematic in the sense that you'll lose a lot of coverage in the central area here. Okay, particularly depending on how far your front row is. So if you're going to do something like that, I used to attend a church where I used to do sound, and I used to move the front row back considerably because of the way the speakers were configured. And the guys who did the decoration would always set the front row right up at the front, right up in line with where the speakers were. And I kept sort of trying to, to explain to them that, look, I'll have dead pockets in the middle where people can't hear, and I'll have areas of this place where people will be able to hear enough, where I can't really turn the volume up louder. And they never got it. It was always I don't want to say an argument, but it was always back and forth. And they'd see me coming to set up and move the first 4 rows to the back. But the annoying thing is, I would always try and sort of tap them on the shoulder halfway through and sort of say, "Look at how engaged the congregation is," what we call them. Look at how engaged the congregation are. Look at how engaged the audience are. When we moved, the first few rows to the back, how everybody was attentive and listening. And then, whenever they had it their way, I'll try and tap them on the shoulder and say, "Can you see that pocket in the front who look very disinterested? Who aren't really sort of paying attention as much. They're probably playing with their clothes or checking their phones or watching the time." And I'd point to them that the areas that have the great coverage are the areas where people are actually able to hear clearly enough. And the areas that don't have good coverage, people are disengaged. And it never quite sunk in. They always thought I was speaking Chinese or something along those lines. But you get places like that. Good people, don't get me wrong. I guess we just need to learn in certain areas, I guess. But yeah, one of the problems with this diagram, the reason why I have this picture up here first is this. A lot of the assumption is this. You see how this speaker is pointed in at an angle? A lot of people who make the wrong assumptions assume that the sound, though we know it travels in straight lines, that the sound is actually traveling exactly the same down this line, and that in this case here, the sound is actually aiming at an angle directly in this direction. And whilst it may be true, it's not necessarily true. While sound travels in a straight direction, the shape of the cone of the speaker, it's sort of like a round cone, and it's got like a plate. It's got a bit of a dip in it. So if it was a plate, you could put something inside, a bowl or something. You could put something inside, and it would sit without spilling over. It's not flat, and it sort of has a concave sort of shape. Some are deeper than others, but then you just have this sort of concave shape on the speaker, and it's round. And how sound travels is, though it travels in a straight line, it actually travels outwards at an angle. So let's see what we have here for you, and I'll show you what I mean. So if you look at this particular, this other illustration I've got for you there, you can see how the waves start out small and they get wider and wider and wider as they leave the speaker. Now within a full range speaker, you've got the tweeter, you've got the main cone. Some speakers will also allow for bass. So you see here, you've got 3 different sections here. What I'm assuming the purpose of this speaker, it might be a studio speaker, but this is what sends out the bass frequencies or the low frequencies. This is what sends out the mid frequencies, the meat of what you're listening to. And this is what sends out, this would be considered the horn, by the way, the one in the middle. The one at the bottom, the term for the the speakers that give out bass frequencies is sub speakers. And the top is what we'd refer to as the tweeter. Now remember these names because when it comes to things like feedback, etc., then you need to know these terms so you can determine where your feedback is coming from and how you can use speaker placement to ensure that you don't get any feedback whatsoever going forward. Okay, so I'll refer to the middle. This section here is the cone, top is the tweeter, bottom is the sub, or the bass frequencies come from the subs. Okay, but sound travels from the center in a circular motion, and though it goes in a straight direction out, you can see that it's kind of fanning out as it goes. Now, two things you need to bear in mind. Yes, it's moving in a straight direction, but the further away it gets from the source, it decays. So the further away that sound is, the quieter it becomes. It doesn't have as much impact. Which is why if you've ever been to a nightclub, or you're at a wedding or something and the DJ is playing and you're closest to the speakers, you'll find that you tend to have more of a good time than those that are further away, even though you're listening to the exact same music, because you feel the impact, the vibrations on your body more than the individuals that are far away. And if there's a lot of people that are crowded in front of the speakers, the ones who are furthest away won't get to feel that impact. So they'll listen and hear the music, but they won't enjoy it as much. This is why you find in certain areas, when they want to utilize coverage, you'll find they'll put speakers all over the building. And then you'll see that once you've done that, straight away you'll see that the individuals that were in areas that didn't have speakers before are now more engaged with what's going on, whether it's a music thing, whether it's a club or a wedding or whatever, whether it's a church and you've changed your setup, and now you have speakers all over the place, strategically placed. You'll find more engagement because you're bringing the source from wherever it is directly to where they are. So for them, it kind of opens up an alertness to sort of say, this stuff is happening here where I am. It's not coming from over there. I'm not disconnected from it. I'm not far away from it. So remember this as well. Remember that it travels in a straight direction. Remember that at the further away it gets from the source, it gets quieter and there's less impact. And also, the other thing you need to remember is these names: sub, cone, and tweeter. Okay? Let's see what else we have here. This is an image that I'm sure many of you have seen before. When you're looking at devices you have, say you've got I'm actually looking at my MacBook Pro right now, and I can see where the volume buttons are, and I can see something that looks very similar to what we're currently looking at on the screen, whereas it's a speaker with waves of sound getting bigger and bigger as they go away. And that's more of the correct illustration of how sound actually moves from one direction, from one position, or one place, so the point of the source, to wherever it's going. Okay. And that's how it actually moves. It gets wider and wider and wider, but it loses its momentum, it loses its strength, it loses its potency the further away it gets. So always bear that in mind, because if you're trying to troubleshoot a problem that you've consistently had for a long period of time, and you're trying to wonder, why is it that these individuals will say this about the sound, whereas these individuals won't? If you understand how the sound is actually moving, you might be able, just from listening to this part of the video, determine how to fix the problem that you have, or to troubleshoot it better. Okay? Here's another illustration of speaker placement. Now you'll notice, I know this is a smaller picture, but you'll notice how these two speakers are at an angle, and you can see the waves that we initially looked at and how they're going through. Now I don't know if you can see this, but there's actually two cones in each of these speakers. So this one's got two, and this one's got two, and these waves are overlapping waves. Yeah. Now these cones are actually different. One is flat and one is more of a bigger cone, and they're side by side from what I can see in this picture. And what I believe is one is the cone and one's the tweeter. and they're side by side, which is not unusual. You do have speakers that are like that. Most of the time, the configuration would be the tweeter being at the top, okay, like this, the cone being in the middle, or at the bottom. You don't tend to have speakers like this, so it's not a common configuration to have speakers like this where the sub is also connected to the other two. I was actually at I was in a building the other day, and we were looking at the actual setup, looking at ways to improve, the sound and stuff. And these guys have this full range speaker where they've got the sub that's actually built into the rest of it. So it's quite a tall standing thing. And they were asking for ways to improve the sound in the building. And the first thing I said to them, which is what I said to them previously, was get rid of your speakers, because they've got a very low ceiling and a very narrow church sort of setup, very narrow, not as long, but it is long-wise. So it's not very long. The distance between the stage and the wall, I don't know, 15 paces. It's not very big. And I just sort of said to them, look, you want something that can pack more of a punch, but is in a smaller form factor, so that you can hang it or dangle it at a more appropriate angle. With these ones, you have to have them flat at you. And what tends to happen is, with the way they had them mounted, they had the sub speaker being what is at ear level, hitting the individuals at ear level, which is not really beneficial as such, because the signal coming to you is going to be very muddy. It's not going to be very clean and clear. They also had additional subs, in addition to the full range speaker. So, the sound ended up very, very muddy, and this particular speaker had an internal crossover, so it was distributing the frequencies itself. It didn't really make for a good solution for this particular building. But just bear that in mind. But yeah, this gives you another illustration of, you see where this individual is placed, and you can see that this individual is, depending on how far back they are, they're probably in the best position to be able to hear everything nicely from the left and to the right. Unfortunately, for some people, your building is not going to be always symmetrical. It's not going to be always sort of rectangular, like a perfect rectangle or a perfect square. Sometimes the building is angled very funny. And if you're unfortunate in the sense that the people who have gotten to the seating arrangement have gotten there without taking into consideration the output from the speakers, and they've gone and made everything sort of, maybe the chairs are in a sort of shoe horse formation, whereas it would have been more appropriate for coverage with the way they've got their speakers set out that it be square. These are things you have to overcome. And sometimes the issue may not be changing the speakers. Sometimes the issue may not be changing the position of the speakers. The issue may actually be changing where the individuals who are listening to the sound in that particular room get to sit, or how they get to be distributed. Sometimes you might have people who have set up the chairs in such a way that they've got a massive middle aisle, and then everything is stacked to the sides, whereas the speaker coverage is actually perfect for the center, like what we're looking at here. And if you're on the sides, you may not get as much if you're on the far right. You may not get as much off the left if you're at the back on the right. Whereas if you were at the back in the middle, then yes, you can experience, if the chairs were in the middle and the aisles were on the sides, you'd experience more of a fuller sound, particularly when you come to do things like panning. The congregation or the audience will get a fuller sound if they're sat in a different position. So always bear that in mind. It's not always getting your gear. Sometimes it's just a case of it's cost effective to just move your seating setup, save yourself some money, and get some good results, get the best results, and everyone's happy. So going a little bit further on, the next sort of image I've picked is this one here. So as you can see from here, the speakers are angled. And as you can also see, as I mentioned earlier on, when we looked at this image here, at this image here, and at this image, we can see that this illustration here is giving you a very nice angle at where the sound from this speaker is going to hit on the walls. Now, if this was sort of square and flush with the stage, you'd have a lot of loss of energy going into the walls and not enough getting back to the people for coverage. But if you have them at an angle and they're in the right position, then you have a good chance that everything is going to be heard nice and clear by the congregation. One of the things or the problems you have with angling speakers inward like this is if someone was to come and stand with their microphone there, you would have to watch how you've EQ'd that mic, particularly in the highs, depending on how. And if you look, I won't speak about this too much in depth here, but in the previous videos we've done, we spoke about frequency response range. And if you look at the video that talks about how to EQ a microphone, we go in depth and we talk about this frequency response range. Now, the frequency response range is when manufacturers make microphones or speakers, what they will do is they will determine how low of a frequency that speaker can produce. So, you've got things like sub bass. If they can come out of that speaker, if it's as low as 20 hertz, then, it'll determine what you can use the speaker for. There's no point in taking a speaker that produces the lowest end of 40 hertz and saying I want to play music that has sub bass in it, dubstep and all that stuff, because you're not going to hear those frequencies because they're lower than 40 hertz. Well, you are going to hear them, but you're not going to get that sub bass sound, that reggaeton. Whereas if your speakers can produce sound as low as 20 hertz, then you'll get the lower frequencies. And we spoke about how speaker manufacturers and microphone manufacturers will shape the frequencies that their mic or their speakers can produce. So what speaker manufacturers will do is they'll design a speaker that can output, or they'll increase the volume of the output naturally from the speaker at certain frequencies. And if you have those EQ'd high, you'll find that your feedback will come from there, because you haven't counted the frequency on the mic. You haven't counted the frequency that's naturally inbuilt into the speaker. It's called a shaped frequency response range. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if you watch the video on how to EQ a mic, I take it into detail there. And I'll do a separate video at some point if I find that there is a need for it, talking about this with illustration. But for now, what I'm trying to say to you is, if the individuals on the stage decide, if they've got wireless mics, to step in here or to try and approach, the crowd, then you'll have a problem, because you're likely to get feedback if you angle your speakers like that. But the good thing about this is it covers any sort of pockets, so you can have your front row closer if you wanted to, or if that helped and you weren't going to be pumping your volume really, really loud, then you can bring your front row closer and maximize on how many seats you can fit into the room. Whereas if you find that your speakers are going to be really, really loud, then you're forced to move your front row further back. But you're not going to worry about coverage, because from wall to wall, at least from here at the very least, from this position here, going backwards, there's full coverage, and it's all around. So you have to be very watchful of this. But the people that are going to enjoy themselves the most are the people who are in this central area here, because they're going to get really good coverage in that area. So that's something to consider when you're angling. Just don't angle them too much such that you start to pick up interference from the stage. I mean, if you've got a singer standing right there, depending on how that singer's microphone is EQ'd, I wouldn't put the sopranos closest there. I'd be wary. But just be wary and be careful of what you're placing close. Obviously, I don't know what the distance is between the stage and the speaker. And also, I don't know how high the speaker is, which is the next thing we're going to actually speak about. There we go. Again, this is another small picture. Let me see if I can make it bigger. Okay, I can't. I hope you can see it. But you can see the cone there, and the tweeter would be above the cone. The tweeter normally sits above the cone, and the cone is there. So this is a full range speaker. And you can see that it's on some sort of a stand. And you can see that the sound, going back to this image here, it goes out in waves. So it comes down as well as up, as well as to the left, as well as to the right, covering all angles. Can you see that? So if you raise your speaker that high, you're going to get frequent sound that's going to come down. You're going to get sound that's going to go up. And you're also going to get it to the left and the right, covering all angles in a circular motion. My rule is this. I've got 2 rules about speaker placement, depending on the room that we're in. I like to have the bottom of my speaker, the very bottom, so this will be underneath the speaker here. That. Actually, I like to have the very bottom of my tweeter, which is there, okay, above the ear of the tallest person who's going to be in that room that day, or the average tallest individual. Because if I wanted to really fill that room with sound and push the volume levels so high such that it has a sort of atmospheric feeling, the impact of that sound is hitting everybody. And I just want to have 2 speakers at the front without additional ones in between, so that I can share the impact of that throughout. Push the volume levels as high or higher than I normally would without having the people who are closest to the speaker complaining. I would put the top of the tweeter, the bottom of the tweeter, above the ear level of the tallest person in the room, because they're the ones who are likely to come to you and sort of say, hey, it's really loud, whereas the shorter people won't hear it as much. Another thing I like to do is, if it's possible and there's a higher ceiling, if there's a really high ceiling, then I'll definitely have it in such a case that the bottom of the speaker is at ear level of the tallest individual in the room. Okay, and the reason why is, again, I like to do sound in such a way that it is clear, but also because obviously most of the places I'll do sound for are like church events, and you know how with having grown up, well, I didn't grow up in church, but you know, being a Christian musician as well, it's about atmosphere when you're coming to do sound for church. But if you want to have that kind of sound that fills the room and, you know, it has a good impact on the individuals, and you want to turn it loud, obviously not loud that it's distorted, but you want to have a nice loud sound without the hassle of individuals saying to you, it's too loud, or it's too this, it's too that. If there's a high enough ceiling, I'll put the speakers quite high up, and then I'll just push that sound out. And then that way, the impact of the sound is not necessarily hitting their ears directly. And again, I talk about this in the How to EQ microphone, where I start to go through the basics of how the human ear works. It's all about air movement. As you know, the speakers are vibrating at the hertz that are being pumped out through to them. And inside the human ear, there are these little bones that pick up those vibrations, send a signal to the brain, and your brain interprets that signal. So when you hear a clap, everybody knows it's a clap because the brain has interpreted the vibration of these bones in the ear as to be that of what a clap sounds like. But we also speak about how, you know, a dog might not necessarily hear the exact same thing as a human being when hands are clapped, because they hear other frequencies that we don't, which would change the overall dynamics of the sound. So they'll hear something similar, or a dolphin will hear something different, or a whale will hear something different, even though it's the same clap. But yeah, I covered all of that in another video, and I won't be going through that again. But I utilize some of this information to determine where I place my speakers if I'm out and about and doing an event in a new venue. Obviously, if it's a venue I know and I've been in, then I know what I can do, what boundaries I can push, etc. But yeah, it's about knowing your boundaries and being able to play around with the information the equipment you have, and the position of the seating. Um, Sometimes it might just be best to ask, a certain group of individuals, if they're quite elderly, and you know that the elderly, they may not hear as clearly as the young people. You might want to put them in an area that is good coverage. And if they're a little bit younger, and they might be worried, or if they've got a baby and they might be worried that the child doesn't need to be in a place where it's really loud, you might be, as a sound guy, have a word with the ushers, or come across and just sort of say, look, the position you've chose to sit in, whilst you're perfectly fine to sit there, just bear in mind this area is probably the loudest area. So if you are looking for somewhere quieter for the baby, etc., you might want to sit here, where you'll still be able to hear it nice and clear, but it won't wake the baby up. Maybe the baby's asleep. So it's knowing things like that that will really help you out, because you're preempting situations and issues where later on it's a complaint coming back to you to say it was too loud or it was too quiet. Okay? So just bear things like that in mind when it comes to where you place your speakers. But overall, the earlier picture we looked at, which was this one here, nope, that one. Remember how we talked about feedback coming to the mic because of speaker placement? Well, the difference here is they've angled the speakers just like in the first one, but they've put the speakers in such a way that anybody with a mic can stand pretty much anywhere on the stage, and they're less likely to cause feedback than in this scenario, where they can step off the stage and automatically they're within firing range. You're already in trouble. You've got your hand on the EQ. You've got your hand on the on the volume fader, and you've got your hand on the mains, ready to turn that down because you're gonna get feedback. This is a little bit more safer. It gives you quite good coverage, but look, you do lose quite a bit in this area here. And you lose quite a bit in this area here, which is not necessarily a bad thing if you know what you're doing. So, for example, if you wanted to use something like this to your advantage, you see where the mouse is right now? Here and here. If this was a full team of singers, musicians, you've got a drum kit, bass, guitar, then you've got a sax, then you've got obviously backing vocalists, you've got singers, you might even have a bit of a choir going on. If you were clever, you would know that the quietest areas are going to be these areas here. That's where I'd stick my singers, because they're not going to, and I'd put my drums center stage, and I'd use as much foam padding and shielding as I possibly can to shield the sound from the drum kit. That way, whatever speaker monitors I put for these guys, I know they're guaranteed that they're going to be able to hear themselves. And it's not going to be an issue that, you stood your singers on mics behind or in front, of the, the back line of the bass and the guitarist and the drummer. And now you have a situation where the singers are constantly complaining, this is too loud for us. We can't hear. And you're having to deal with that problem. So you could utilize that and put them in the quieter areas. Some people might say, well, I'll put the drummers and stuff in these areas here and make it louder there. It's fine. If you've got enough space to work with it, stick the noisy stuff in the corners. As long as it doesn't bleed through and affect these guys, and they're not constantly asking you to turn up their monitors to the point where their monitors are now beginning to cause feedback, then you're okay. But this is what I would do, or this is the kind of thinking I would have if my setup allowed me to do this. And that's where the stage was, and that's what the room looked like. Again, it depends on how wide and how far away the back of the room is from the front, how wide it is. But this is a really, really good angle. You'll see here that the pockets of light blue here are areas where people won't be able to hear. So if you sat the front row, say, this close, in the areas where it's white, people will tell you they can't hear. In the areas where it's lighter blue, in these areas here, they were like, nah, I can't really hear properly. These guys won't be able to hear much of what's coming from there. Sorry, of what's coming from here. And these guys won't be able to hear anything of that's coming from that speaker. So if you've got panning, they'll miss out on certain things, and they'll be the ones who will come and complain. But the people that are here in this area are the ones who are getting the best coverage. The center people obviously the best, and then obviously it decays as it goes further back. So you have to think of the areas where I'd say, okay, probably if I had babies, mothers with babies, I'd probably put them in this area here, where they can make noise and it won't be loud, hopefully too loud to affect the people there, because they're in good coverage. So the speakers here are servicing them quite well. They're unlikely, if I do it right, to hear the clamor and the noise from the kids here and here. And then, again, I'd look at the kinds of people that are coming in. If it's music, and I'll sort of watch where all the old people go, instruct the ushers to say, look, it's better if you have these kinds of people in this position and these kinds of people in that position. It'll be better overall for everybody. So you have to be very clever and proactive with what you do. But this is a really, really good setup. So we went from this to that. Now, again, depending on how high the speakers are from the ground, we spoke about, the distance. Just because those speakers in this picture are on this, showing as being on the stage, it doesn't necessarily mean they're sat on top of the stage. They could be suspended. Then there's other sort of configurations where you're angling the speaker in such a way that it hits directly on the people. So it may not be flat straight. It might be angled slightly. Again, that's really, really good. But if you're going to be moving microphones inside your congregation, you might want to watch how you angle those speakers, where you place the angled speakers. You might not just want one set of left and right. You might want some additional ones in this corner here, so this is the right of the stage, that's the left. So you'll want another one here giving you the right signal, and another one here giving you the left signal, so these guys can hear what it is they're missing out on. Because if they're sat here, yeah, they're hearing a little bit from the left signal, but they're not hearing anything from the right. So what did I say earlier on? Sorry. So you want right here and left there, right? Yeah. So essentially, you just want to put your speakers in a position that you get full coverage, and then maybe not turn the ones that are on the sides as loud as the main ones, so that their impact or their power is only reaching as far as this section here, and anything after that, they're too quiet to affect the people over here. And you don't have sort of a disoriented group of individuals there that are getting too much. Yeah. So think about how you place your speakers. Use some of what you've learned here to troubleshoot some of the problems you've had. It might be that your speakers are too low. It might be that they're angled. It might be that you're not using the left-right configuration correctly. Utilize panning as well. And do watch the how to EQ a microphone video, because I talk a lot about some very key things that you'll need to know that I won't discuss in this video. And I might do a separate one about frequency response ranges and shaped frequency response ranges. But for now, I'm signing out. Goodbye.